We're back with Mr. Speaker Dean Cannon and Mr. President Mike Haridopolos from the chambers of the Florida House of Representatives. Mr. President, big issue going to dominate a lot of your time and attention, putting together the 2011 budget. What are going to be some great challenges?
Well, it's a very difficult task, and let's just lay out the number. At least $3.6 billion short, meaning we do not have as much money as we did the year before. But the reality is it's not unlike businesses and families are going through right now in the state of Florida. What we need to do is prioritize and make sure we get the most bang for the dollar, so to speak. But we're going to lay out one pledge on top of this. Despite the shortfall, both Dean Cannon and I have made a positive statement: no new taxes, period. We cannot afford to stifle job growth by raising taxes and making us uncompetitive with other states. So we're going to have a very tough row to hoe with a $3.6 billion shortfall, but we need to send that very coherent, straightforward message that business owners and families alike know that we're not going to reach any deeper into their pockets because they can't afford it. 1 out of 8 Floridians are out of work, and that is unacceptable. And the last thing we need to do with this type of economic downturn is to extract more out of their hard-earned wallet.
Mr. Speaker, I know that you're exactly with him on this.
100%.
And but it's an enormous problem. Where do you go to get that money? There've got to be some cuts. What are you thinking about?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is be intellectually honest and say that with essentially and Mike mentioned the $3.6 billion shortfall, that doesn't even allow for the reserve we'll need to preserve the state's bond rating. So it could be 4.6, 5.6, and of the money we control, the state portion of the budget is really about $37.5 billion. So it's more like the 12 to 15% reduction in what we have control over as the appropriating branch of government. So the beginning point is everything will have to take reductions. In the past, years past, sometimes folk would say, well, just don't cut this one area, or just leave education, healthcare, transportation, you name it. I think we need to be honest that there will be reductions in every area. Like Mike said, we need to prioritize. We try to put people over things. So for example, in education, prioritize classroom funding over new school construction. We'll have the class size issue to deal with, but what's the core mission? Instruction, not construction. So let's emphasize that in the education arena. In the healthcare department or healthcare subject matter area, President Haridopolos and I have worked very hard to come up with an outline for Medicaid reform. That's a federal program that the federal government puts constraints on us. Under his leadership and hopefully mine in the House, we've got an approach to reform that system and begin reducing that program, which has been growing at an unsustainable rate. If we don't do something, eventually, if you look at the graphs, that would consume our entire state budget.
Either one of you, I assume that you're going to have to get some kind of approval from the federal government to make the changes that you wish to in Medicaid. Is that true? Are you going to have to get some kind of option approved so you can move to managed care, Mr. President?
Well, again, yes, we will. To put it simply, yes, we will. And I hope that Washington, D.C. will learn lessons from just a few years ago. Back in 1996, a Democrat president and a Republican Congress recognized that welfare as we know it was broken. And it did not serve well when you have a one-size-fits-all situation. So Washington had the common sense to say, we're going to allow the states to have flexibility on this important program. And this is what we can do with Medicaid in the same regard. Again, what Medicaid is a top-down Washington, D.C. health care plan that does not serve the patient well. I'm happy to be married to a doctor. Dean's, of course, brother is a doctor. They recognize that Medicaid's broken because it doesn't serve the patient well. We need to have patient-centered health care as opposed to government-centered health care. And so we'll be asking Washington, D.C. for what's called a waiver, meaning give us the flexibility, and in exchange we'll also give accountability to Washington, meaning the taxpayer, of how we'll do this. If you give us that flexibility, I think you'll have a better system that serves the patient better and allow for states that are different. We're a lot different than New York or California, and for that matter, Clewiston's a lot different than Miami. Allow us that flexibility, and we'll take the accountability for a change as politicians. But the only thing we're concerned about is that Washington might not grant us that flexibility, and then when we're in a real quandary towards the future.
When will you know about the granting of the waiver?
Well, fortunately, the outline for the plan that Mike and I have worked on can be begun under the existing 1115 waiver that we have. Now, eventually, for it to expand statewide over the 5 years or the 4 or 5 year horizon that Mike and I have talked about, it will have to be modified. But like Mike said, we're hoping that we can begin within the existing waiver we've got now, demonstrate success based on what's already worked, and then carry those concepts out so that when we approach Washington, we can say, we're not reinventing the wheel, we're asking for permission to expand something that we can demonstrate has worked. And that's I think, what sound most likely to get us the answer we're hoping for.
And just to add on this, what's really important is that the quandary also that Dean and I are in is that we're so frustrated with what's happening in Washington right now. Everybody and his brother knows, who has ever been involved in state government, that Medicaid is broken. So their solution with their health care plan was expand the program by 50%. It's almost laughable if it wasn't so bad. That's why Dean and I think has shown incredible leadership last year, and we almost got there last year with the plan. I fully anticipate embracing the House and Senate concepts together so that we can do exactly what Dean has led from last year, offers flexibility to the states.
When will the state start feeling the effects of that expansion? Have we already begun to see that, or when will we start seeing it?
It will take full implementation by 2014. And just to give some math so people understand, we have 3 million people right now on Medicaid. By 2014, at least 4.5 million people on Medicaid. So you're going to see, as Dean talked about earlier, a transfer of capital from one group to another. And that is not the solution to health care.
All right, let's talk about another cost-saving strategy that I know has been discussed quite a bit, and that's to take a hard look at the state retirement system, the pension system of the state. Mr. Speaker, would you like to address that?
Absolutely. One of the core concepts is the private sector realized years ago that an overrich compensation or retirement system was unsustainable. You look at, Mike mentioned California earlier. They've got a state where literally the state, if it were a corporation, would be already in bankruptcy. It's important that we be fair to people who've already entered the system and who've relied in good faith on expectations, but that we make adjustments now so that 10, 20 years from now, when my kids and Mike's kids are grown up, they're not facing a bankruptcy like California is today. We intend to be thoughtful, and there's a lot of emotion that surrounds that debate. We want to let the facts guide us, but have employees contribute to their health plans, have them and to their retirement plans is common sense. It's something that the private sector does, and it makes sense for government to take a measured step in that direction.
There's so many more issues I'd like to talk with you about. I want to take a minute or so on education. We could spend a whole half hour on education, but then I want to come back to talk about your priorities. Education. Last session, a bill on reforming education was probably the most controversial of the 2010 session, tying, among other things, teacher pay to student performance. Will education reform be on the agenda of the 2011 session, and will it be a priority issue? Mr.
Absolutely,
President?
and it must. I'm here before you today because I have wonderful parents and I gained a great public school education. We need to make sure that is the bedrock of our society. And the reason why we're so big on merit pay is, shouldn't the best teachers be rewarded with more pay? That's what America is all about. There is, of course, some politics played last year, and we understand that. But the goal is to make sure that the best and the brightest, those who have a spiritual gift of teaching, stay in the classroom and are rewarded for doing outstanding service. The last thing we want is for a talented teacher to be kicked into administration because they can make more money there. Their spiritual gift is in the classroom, and that's why we're committed to teacher pay and merit pay. And we've worked very hard over the summer and fall and now into the new year on communicating with teachers, asking how we can best motivate them to do well, because we want to keep those teachers in the classroom, keep them motivated, but more importantly, make sure that our kids have the motivated, talented people in the classroom as opposed to the politics from last year.
All right, we've just got a minute or so left to go. In fact, it is a minute. Very quickly, out of all the things you could be doing, and the list is long, I had a lot more issues to ask you about. What are a couple of things, Mr. Speaker, you just think must be done this year, and then you, Mr. President?
I've got really one guiding goal that trumps all the others, and that's pass a balanced, thoughtful budget that doesn't raise fees or taxes. To me, that trumps everything else. All these other policy areas we talked about are important, and I think they'll pass. But the big win for me would be, can we get through the budget process thoughtfully, deal with a shortfall, do what moms and dads have done, which is reduce our spending to match our income, and not increase the cost of living when we have unemployment above 14%.
That's real easy. Exactly what he said.
President Haridopolos, Speaker Cannon, thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to future conversations.
Thank you.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Steve.